Welcome back to Harbor. Well, the economy was the albatross around Democrats' necks this election, but it didn't have to be that way, did it? This economy ain't chopped liver, after all. Unemployment is down below 6% now. We've got 10 million new jobs. The deficit's at its lowest since 2008. Healthcare costs are growing at an historically slow rate. Gas prices, as we all know, are below $3 a gallon. The auto industry is back, thanks to the government and President Obama. And the stock market's at an all-time high today, all-time high. But voters weren't buying any of those numbers. 70% of midterm voters this week said the economy was in the dumps. They didn't trust Democrats to fix it. The economy was the most important issue for voters by a mile. And our NBC election polls showed Republicans carrying it on that issue by a 9-point edge over Democrats on the economy. So the Republicans got the advantage. But if the voters weren't buying, here's my question, were the Democrats actually selling? Compare today to 1984. And like today, the country back then was still digging itself out of a bad recession. But when people went to the polls back then, the unemployment rate was higher than it is today, at 7.5% back then. Yet President Reagan campaigned on the progress the country had made till that date. He took the credit. Here's a clip from his Morning in America advertisements.
This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better.
Wow, what a voice that guy has. Anyway, in this recovery, Democrats never took credit, whether it was the stimulus, saving the auto industry, or creating 10 million new jobs. People still want something, of course, when it comes to the economy, but what do they want? And when will they get it? And who's going to get the credit now? Barney Frank was U.S. Congressman from Massachusetts and an architect of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform bill. And Steve Ratner was auto advisor to the U.S. Treasury, had a lot to do with saving the auto industry. In fact, he led that effort. I guess czar is still a good word. Steve, let me go to Congressman Frank on this question. Is this all PR, advertising, big bucks for TV that made Ronald Reagan somehow a hero of an economy that had come back from the recession he created? He and Paul Volcker back in the early 60s, by 84, he was Mr. Cool. This president was hiding in the bushes this whole campaign because people didn't want him out there because he should have been embarrassed in some way. Explain the different psychologies of the two parties on the economy.
Well, it goes back, I think, to the terrible economic crisis, and the Democrats had the worst luck. A crisis occurred, a terrible one, in 2008 that was really brought about by Republican policies more than anything else, although there was some shared blame, the total deregulation and resistance to any regulation. And the Democrats had the responsibility of cleaning it up. You mentioned the auto effort, which was an enormous success. I believe if you poll the American people today, they would denounce the Democrats for bailouts. Everything that we call a bailout was started by George Bush. We helped make it work. But I think that's the lingering problem. Secondly, and here is the problem with the economy, and it's a vicious cycle for the Democrats, it's the increasing inequality. Yes, we have the best economy in the developed world by a significant margin, but very little of that is being felt by the average person. And in fact, I think for people whose incomes have been frozen and who have not seen their own situation improve, they almost get angry when they hear things are good. So we have got to, we're in a vicious cycle. People are blaming government because they're not getting a part of this prosperity. So they then vote for the people who are determined to make sure that the government doesn't do anything that would share things more equally.
But, Barney, let me ask you this. Ronald Reagan probably faced the same inequality. Maybe didn't care about it, but it was there, too. And yet the Republicans rolled past the inequality factor and just took credit for the overall numbers. How come they got away with it? President Reagan carried 49 states.
Two things. First of all, inequality has gotten worse. I mean, unfortunately, and it's, there are economic factors at work, and there are things that have exacerbated it. And the other thing is that the country has been in this terrible mood since the financial crisis. It was a paradox that we had to look as if we were helping the people who caused it. I think we should have been even tougher on them. But I think that's the situation, that the context in which it was operating was worse. And then there were some other factors, things like Ebola and the Islamic State, irrelevant to any decision made by this governor. Not, in fact, I think the president's done a very good job in Ebola, but it just added to a general malaise. And we're the party of government. When people are angry at the government, we suffer.
Steve, let's get in here because I think Barney Frank made it very clear there. Words, it's all about lingo. Morning in America, bailouts. You used to write lingo, and you do get an edge. Explain to me why the president's never gotten credit for what you and he did together on saving an industry which most people consider iconic American industry. We make cars. We love cars. Kids used to wait for the first cars to come out. You and I, September. Who are the new cars? What are the hot cars? We love that stuff. Where's the excitement now about the auto industry coming back?
Well, I think the president has gotten some credit for the auto industry. Look what happened in the 2012 election when he carried Michigan, he carried Ohio. I think if you look at the polls, while Congressman Frank is right that bailouts are generally unpopular, I think the auto industry rescue has tipped into positive territory. But let me just take one thing that Congressman Frank said and bring it forward, because I think it is the key point here. Inequality in and of itself, I don't think is the major problem. I think it's bad, but I don't think it's what is bothering Americans. What's bothering Americans is that the average American has still not gotten a pay increase in the last 6 years. It's not President Obama's fault. There's a lot of complicated reasons. But for the average American, wages are down about 1% after you adjust for inflation. So it's very hard to go out there and say this is great and there are 10 million new jobs. If you look at jobs, for example, there's a smaller percentage of working-age Americans working today than there were 6 years ago. Again, the president has done a great job of bringing this country back, but it is still a glass half full for many Americans, and therefore it's a hard case to make.
Well, you pick up on this. What's being talked about is a menu of options to really get the economy growing. Not necessarily more fairly, but growing and boosting the economy overall. Trade expansion, that's more of a Republican issue. Tax reform, corporate tax reduction rates, that's more of a Republican issue. What's it called? Minimum wage. That's a Democratic issue. And infrastructure, unfortunately, has become a Democratic issue. In those areas of 4 areas, is there a combination of those different policy improvements that could get the economy growing for everybody? Steve Ratner.
Yes, I think all the things you mentioned would actually be pluses if they're done right, if they're done in a way that's fair to the average American, that are not simply a giveaway, excuse me, to big business. And then there's one other one you didn't mention, which is education and training. When you look at what's happened to wages, manufacturing wages are down about 3 or 4% over the last 6 years. We need to find ways to re-educate, retrain these people, train the younger people for the jobs of the future. These are all incredibly positive things that can happen, but of course, as you well know, we've had nothing but gridlock for the last 2 years, and so nothing has happened.
What would you do to make it work? How do you put a deal together that helps at least the more progressive approaches to issues like, obviously, minimum wage, obviously a progressive approach to infrastructure, because that means real jobs with real salaries, good salaries?
Well, it's hard. Obviously, we had an election that didn't go our way, so it's a little hard to dictate the agenda. So what we're going to have to do is compromise. So the Republicans want corporate tax reform. There are ways you can do corporate tax reform that are not a giveaway to big business, and where you can use the proceeds for infrastructure, for education, for programs like that. So we have to be willing to deal. We have to be willing to make compromises to move the country forward.
Let me go to Congressman Frank. While we're being positive here, because I want to be positive for a while at least, Mitch McConnell's out there to take apart Dodd-Frank, your Wall Street reform effort. What do you think? Is he going to get somewhere with the Republican Senate? Are there areas where they can just repeal the good work you did with Senator Dodd?
I hope they try, Chris. I agree with Steve Ratner. The auto bailouts are popular. Mitt Romney had to get himself all tied up by trying to explain why he hadn't been for them. Bailouts, but you know, that's our problem. By the way, government in general is unpopular. Much of the specifics are popular. Government is a rare example that I guess can exist in the political world, not in the physical, of a whole that's smaller than the sum of the parts, as far as the public is concerned.
I agree.
But with regard to financial reform, they don't like the Consumer Bureau. Let them try to dismantle that. They want to re-deregulate derivatives. Frankly, they talk a good game here. I think in the end, they aren't going to do this. The American people, if there's anything they dislike more than what they think is incompetent government, it's the financial reform. In fact, I think part of the anger is that they think the financial industry was treated too gently in response to the crisis. So if that's what McConnell thinks, can I just say that one thing McConnell said that I thought was extraordinary in self-denigration. He said when the president talked about doing some things by executive order, as far as the Republican Party was concerned, it was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Describing your own party as a dumb animal that goes into a frenzy when it sees a non-threatening, inanimate object, I guess to some extent that's right. I guess that's the way I thought about the Tea Party, but I'm interested to see Mitch McConnell joining in that characterization.
I think you outthought him. Anyway, thank you. By the way, I always ask people about government. Do you want to? Tomorrow's Friday with Catholics. That's always the day to eat tuna fish. Would you like to open a can of tuna tomorrow that hasn't been inspected? Would you like to know there's no FDA? Would you like to get on an airplane tomorrow? There's no FAA. There's no inspection for safety of airplanes. Government doesn't get a good sales pitch, but my God, if we lived in a country without it, we'd be in trouble.
The parts are very popular. Then you add them up, and somehow it becomes an unpopular whole.
Hey,
and by the way, Chris,
Ryder,
the church has changed on that. I
do know that. Funny,
you
don't
get
have
Jewish
to tell me
advice about that.
I've outsourced my thinking. Anyway, thank you, Barney Frank, and thank you, Steve Ratner. By the way, smile because you helped save the American auto industry.
Yes.
Every young guy looks up to you as the guy that gave them their hot new car. Thank you.
Thank
Up
you very
next,
much.
Michael Jordan launched a war of words when he criticized President Obama's golf game. Well, now the president's. Well, this isn't serious stuff. He's hitting back. Not really. I'm sure they like each other. This is Hardball, the place for politics.